morning. So we are starting the second day of this international seminar. First, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference, Maurício and Douglas. Douglas asked me to tell that he cannot be here this morning because he's still resolving some structural things of the conference. So I endorse what Professor Arthur Stanford said yesterday, that doing or in the organizing conference like that, before the situation of education in Brazil is an act of resistance. So congratulations to Maurício and to Douglas who are organizing such complex conference. And I would like to say that I'm really pleased to be here in the company of such great colleagues, of such great minds. And I would also like to thank Professor Marcelo Neves, who has been really generous to me among all these years. And if it was not his studies and his work, we would not be here today discussing all these ideas. So we are going to start this panel. Each one of the panelists are going to have 15-20 minutes. After that, I'm going to do some comments to their presentations, and then we are going to open to questions. So first, I'm going to pass the word to Professor Miguel.
Thank you very much. First of all, I apologize to the distinguished non-Brazilian guests to this conference, the fact that I am going to speak in Portuguese. Due to my misunderstanding, I prepared my paper in Portuguese and I'm simply not fluent enough in English to translate it directly to you as I speak. I tried to do it last night, but I was quickly lost in translation, so to speak. So I hope I can summarize the main points of my argument in the discussion that will follow our presentations. Antes de mais, queria agradecer muito o convite para estar aqui hoje, em especial ao Maurício e a todos os mais organizadores deste evento, que é de facto um evento memorável, também para os constitucionalistas, e é essa a perspectiva em que aqui me apresento. E queria dizer que a leitura da obra de Marcelo Neves constituiu para mim, habituado à visão tradicional do constitucionalismo normativo, um verdadeiro choque ao desfazer muito dos lugares comuns que os constitucionalistas ainda têm sobre a política e sobre a relação da política com o direito. E esses lugares comuns são essencialmente dois. Primeiro, a ideia de que na política reside a unidade última de cada território organizado como Estado e que constitui, por assim dizer, o fecho da volta do edifício social. Esta é uma visão ainda presa ao modo do Aristóteles e que, de facto, a obra de Marcelo Neves, no campo particular do direito constitucional, veio, pura e simplesmente, demolir ou destruir. E um segundo lugar comum tem uma origem mais recente, é a crença na separação liberal entre Estado e sociedade. O primeiro, identificar com a esfera da política, a segunda com a esfera da atividade económica e da atuação de forças espontâneas da sociedade. Na verdade, como dizia Luhmann, este segundo lugar comum é, na verdade, uma renovação da velha distinção entre polis e oikos, através da distinção entre Estado e sociedade do século XIX. Na minha exposição vou abordar os seguintes pontos. O meu ponto de partida é uma certa depreciação da política no contexto da Europa, em que se reconhece a necessidade de reforçar processos de legitimidade de input num contexto de austeridade em que os processos de legitimidade de output estão cada vez mais fragilizados. A seguir, apontaria o modo como a teoria dos sistemas lida com estes dois lugares comuns que mencionei e, finalmente, apresentaria aqui aquilo que considero serem as potencialidades para o pensamento constitucional da ideia de razão transversal na teoria constitucional de Marcelo Neves. Finalmente, dou alguns exemplos em que esta teoria pode ser útil na realidade portuguesa. Na realidade, os dois primeiros pontos, não vos vou fazer perder tempo com eles. Estou aqui entre uma comunidade que, muito em torno da obra de Marcelo Neves, conhece profundamente a teoria dos sistemas sociais de Luhmann, a crítica que lhe faz Marcelo Neves, e não iria aqui acrescentar nada de verdadeiramente novo. Em suma, poderia dizer-se que, de acordo com este modo de pensar, a política deixa de ser entendida na base de uma relação vertical com os restantes domínios da vida social, em que dirige o conjunto da sociedade, e passa a ser no contexto de uma relação horizontal com esses mesmos domínios. Coloca-se muitas vezes uma questão de saber se assim a teoria dos sistemas não se inseriria numa tendência moderna de depreciação da política, e eu acho que uma primeira resposta seria necessariamente ambivalente. Uma resposta afirmativa, na medida em que a política é desalojada de um lugar privilegiado no conjunto da sociedade. E negativa, evidentemente, no contexto em que, para a teoria dos sistemas, não se pode conceber uma sociedade sem política. O que importa é precisamente repensar, à luz da teoria de Marcelo Neves, a definição tradicional da Constituição, muito dada nas universidades portuguesas, com o estatuto jurídico do político. Afinal, como é que se relacionam nesta definição a política e o direito? No fundo, a dificuldade que se coloca é, partindo do reconhecimento que a política é o único sistema que dispõe de uma possibilidade direta de influência sobre o conjunto da sociedade através da tomada de decisões vinculativas, enquanto que os demais sistemas, ainda que possam invocar uma jurisdição universal, não chegam a ter uma possibilidade equivalente de decidir centralmente. Como é que se consegue, então, conferir validade a essas decisões para o conjunto da sociedade, definida territorialmente, claro, e de as impor pela força? Esta forma de interpelar o lugar da Constituição reflete-se diretamente numa distinção habitual entre os constitucionalistas, entre um constitucionalismo dirigente, que eu diria que é claramente recusado no contexto da teoria do Marcelo Neves, e uma Constituição entendida apenas como um ordenamento quadro, que é também entendido como insuficiente. Ora, uma primeira resposta a esta relação entre política e direito seria uma resposta ideológica, que muitas vezes se associa à teoria dos sistemas e que onde se critica que aí se possa conceber, em que aí se possa conceber a possibilidade de uma espécie da teoria dos sistemas como uma mão invisível que asseguraria o equilíbrio entre os vários sistemas sociais. Esta é uma resposta, como eu dizia, ideológica, não é claramente a resposta do Luhmann, também não a resposta do Marcelo Neves. Pelo contrário, a resposta do Luhmann seria uma resposta radical e iluminista, no sentido em que o que se preocupa, a missão do sociólogo, não é ser, digamos, um sacerdote da modernidade, mas é de apontar as distorções e até expansões dos sistemas uns em relação aos outros. Mas aquilo que eu aqui quereria verdadeiramente falar é do interesse do conceito que Marcelo Neves acrescenta à ideia de acoplamento estrutural como uma descrição da relação entre os diferentes sistemas, e a isso acrescenta uma dimensão normativa através da sua ideia de razão transversal. E esta ideia é, para mim, muito desafiante, na medida em que permite superar algumas dificuldades de uma outra forma por vezes, os constitucionalistas têm de encarar estes problemas, que é a ideia de razão pública do Rawls. E eu aqui queria já fazer um parênteses, só descobri ontem, tarde demais, sem ter possibilidade de ler, que este cotejo entre a ideia de razão transcendental e a ideia de razão pública foi já avançado pelo Fábio Portela, mas num sentido diferente, julgo eu, daquilo que eu aqui quereria propor. Porque o que entendo é que precisamente a ideia de razão transcendental permite superar algumas dificuldades que vejo no conceito de razão pública e que o próprio Rawls apresentava como um modelo de raciocínio dos tribunais constitucionais, ou um modelo de raciocínio de todos aqueles atores que num sistema político têm, para usar uma expressão do Habermas, encargos cognitivos especiais, ou seja, os parlamentares, todos aqueles que exercem cargos de autoridade e, em especial, os tribunais. Qual é a dificuldade, a possibilidade que o conceito de razão transversal oferece? Oferece uma dificuldade especial no conceito de razão pública, segundo eu entendo, que é a pretensão de se apresentar como um consenso de sobreposição entre diferentes doutrinas abrangentes, diferentes doutrinas filosóficas que seriam omnicompreensivas e que, portanto, seriam insustentáveis para fundar uma lógica deliberativa num Estado constitucional. Mas, simplesmente, Rawls nunca esclarece se a razão pública é algo que se impõe a essas doutrinas abrangentes ou, pelo contrário, é uma parte das doutrinas abrangentes. E, de facto, não consegue sair deste paradoxo de uma forma como eu acredito que o conceito de razão transcendental consegue fazer. E consegue fazer porque é precisamente uma visão da razão que não se pretende apresentar como uma integração superior das várias visões que existem inelutavelmente numa sociedade do dissenso e numa sociedade multicultural. Só para terminar, muito rapidamente, queria agora apresentar algumas potencialidades deste conceito na perspectiva da realidade constitucional portuguesa. Através de 3 exemplos. Um primeiro exemplo pondo em relação o Estado com o direito supranacional, no caso do direito da União Europeia. Em Portugal houve uma discussão muito extensa sobre qual deveria ser o ordenamento com prioridade, o direito constitucional português, o direito da União, e obviamente quando se tornou inevitável reconhecer o primato do direito da União, que era originário, que é derivado, sobre o direito interno, a Constituição portuguesa foi alterada e passou a dizer isso mesmo. Passou a dizer que as disposições do direito da União são aplicáveis na ordem interna, nos termos definidos pelo direito da União. Mas, e isto é um aspecto agora interessante, acrescentou-se imediatamente, com respeito pelos princípios fundamentais do Estado de Direito Democrático. Ou seja, a Constituição portuguesa prescindiu do seu lugar hierárquico, que é tradicional das Constituições nesta matéria, e aceitou o diálogo com o direito da União. Um segundo exemplo, na relação entre o Estado e as comunidades locais. É um exemplo que é certamente menos trágico daquele que é discutido pelo Fábio na relação entre o Estado e as comunidades indígenas do Brasil, mas é igualmente revelador. Em Portugal, como é sabido, não existem, ao contrário de Espanha, os chamados touros de morte, em que o touro é morto na arena. E existe uma lei, ou existia uma lei, dos tempos da ditadura de 1928, que proibia, sob pena de multas, as touradas de morte. Obviamente, ninguém deu atenção a esta lei, que já tinha sido tentada no século XIX, até que, na década de 90, os defensores dos direitos dos animais decidiram ressuscitar, curiosamente, uma lei da ditadura para impedir as touradas de morte em pontos remotos do país, existem praticamente 2 ou 3 lugares. O resultado foi uma luta entre o legislador e as comunidades locais, e as comunidades locais ganharam, porque a única forma do Estado o fazer seria, para impedir os touros de morte, enfim, disparar sobre manifestantes em peso, de comunidades em peso que não desistiam daquela iniciativa. E finalmente o legislador desistiu através de uma lei em que reconhecia um costume local em zonas circunscritas e sem pôr em causa a proibição para o resto do território nacional. Um último exemplo, agora, na relação entre Tribunal e legislação, Tribunal Constitucional, Poder Legislativo. Prende-se com uma disposição da Constituição Portuguesa, que penso que, aliás, também existe por influência da Constituição Portuguesa na Constituição Brasileira, que permite ao Tribunal Constitucional limitar os efeitos da declaração de inconstitucionalidade com força obrigatória geral, dizendo que esses efeitos não se aplicam retroativamente, mas apenas a partir da data de entrada em vigor da decisão do Tribunal. Ora, a designada jurisprudência da crise veio aplicar esta disposição num sentido totalmente original, no mínimo. Portanto, o que se entendia tradicionalmente é que o Tribunal podia, em vez de aplicar retroativamente a sua decisão, que tinha efeitos desde a entrada em vigor da lei inconstitucional, só se aplicava a partir do momento da publicação da própria decisão. E aconteceu que o Tribunal Constitucional declarou inconstitucionais as disposições do orçamento que reduziam fortemente os vencimentos dos funcionários públicos. Simplesmente esta disposição constava de uma lei do orçamento que entrou em vigor em janeiro e a decisão do Tribunal foi de junho. O Tribunal não se limitou a dizer que a sua decisão produzia efeitos a partir de junho e não desde janeiro. Disse que só produzia efeitos depois, no fim do exercício orçamental e para o próximo exercício orçamental. E, ao fazê-lo, obviamente, num contexto em que Portugal tinha feito um empréstimo junto do FMI de 71 mil milhões de euros, o Tribunal percebeu que a sua racionalidade própria de aplicação dos princípios constitucionais não podia ir contra uma racionalidade política e encontrou, com base nesta disposição, uma forma de conciliar estas duas exigências que eram exigências contrárias. Finalmente, mesmo para terminar, foi aqui dito que o Marcelo Neves integrou o constitucionalismo na teoria dos sistemas, em vez de se limitar a integrar uma teoria da Constituição, elementos de uma teoria da Constituição nesta última. Isto é, de facto, um feito notável e um feito que nos permite aprender e realizar potencialidades da teoria dos sistemas que, para mim, eram desconhecidas. Mas o que interessa salientar é também a dimensão emancipatória que a sua teoria do transconstitucionalismo traz ao direito constitucional, certamente com essa base teórica, mas muito para além dela. E é assim que concluo. Muito obrigado, Marcelo, muito obrigado pela sua obra.
Alô? Well, first of all, I will say one or two words in Portuguese and then I will present my and then I will talk in English. lugar, quero agradecer a presença de todos aqui. Quero cumprimentar também a mesa, o professor Miguel, Brito, Fábio Almeida, Carina, Calabria. Quero um congresso em homenagem ao professor Marcelo Neves, quero também homenageá-lo aqui publicamente, né, pela sua obra principalmente. Marcelo, obviamente, é de muita importância para mim, não é? A gente se conheceu na PUC São Paulo há 10 anos, talvez mais. E desde lá, como orientador, como professor, como foi na PUC, foi de extrema importância para mim. E assim era também de ser orientador com as suas obras. Né? Além disso, do ponto de vista acadêmico, é alguém bastante generoso, que ajudou não só a mim, como a muitas outras pessoas, dando oportunidades acadêmicas em pontos, em centros de referência no mundo todo, para que, com o único objetivo de que a ciência brasileira pudesse, ou a ciência jurídica brasileira pudesse, eu ia dizer avançar, mas vamos dizer, melhorar, né, de alguma forma, ter contato com outras experiências. Nesse sentido, eu parabenizo e homenageio aqui o professor Marcelo Neves, essa obra. Né? Eu ia apresentar um pouco mais, também fazendo homenagem a Marcelo, eu ia apresentar alguma coisa, algumas vamos dizer assim, concepções teóricas que eu estou tendo por agora, que eu estou desenvolvendo depois do doutorado, né? Mas fui desafiado pelo Fábio aqui, em e-mail, em conversas, a gente falar um pouco sobre a situação política brasileira hoje, já que nosso painel tem a ver com o Estado de Direito e com consenso e dissenso. E agora eu vou falar em inglês, por causa do nosso painel aqui, programa de alguns que é a questão. Well, summarizing the argument, I will hold that it's highly doubtful if we can talk about the presence of rule of law and democracy in the Brazilian situation, the Brazilian current situation. As I see it, many of our political and legal problems come from the fact that Brazil has a very weak public sphere. The discussion is to be seen against the background of the Brazilian coalitional presidentialism. Neves' works has exerted influence over my considerations in the sense of conceiving and discussing notions such as the rule of law and public sphere. I will argue that the current political and legal situation in Brazil shows that seeking to favor the particular desires of the elites, the political negotiation, fundamentally the negotiations made behind closed doors, hook the institutional chessboard and the arrangements between the federal executive and legislative powers, something which is not always given due consideration by the neo-institutionalist literature. As I see it, rule of law has been presented by modern liberal political theories and modern constitutionalists as the idea of the separation among legislative, administrative, and judicial powers. It is an assumption related to state checks and balance mechanisms which are necessary to assure the independence and proper functioning of different state realms, excluding the possibility of despotic uses of power by a singular state body. Rule of law is based on the equality of all members before the law. It is related to citizens and state constitutions. That's the classical picture. I might say that in modern constitutional arenas, there is a democratic political legitimation of law as social system, on the one hand, and a legal legislative politics on the other hand. The legitimation of politics by law is what we call rule of law. It can be said that there is a very hard, stressed relationship between law and politics in constitutional states. Following Marcelo Neves, I can hold that without democracy, the rule of law and the fundamental rights cannot be concretized, because a strong political arrangement based on exclusion blocks basic legal principles such as legality and equality. Democracy without rule of law means the dictatorship of majority. It is very important to know that the whole literature on presidentialism and parliamentary coalitions produced since the promulgation of our constitution until now presuppose the existence of a democratic regime and therefore the occurrence of elections, even if important, the differentiation factors such as clientelism, pork barrel politics, and patrimonialism are eventually acknowledged. Well, let now focus on our literature concerning the coalitional presidentialism in Brazil. Now. Alô. Now, institutionalists of different strengths focus on Brazil's current federal constitution and the main of current electoral regulation with the purpose of understanding the political power games of the Brazilian parliament and the executive power in issues that prize empirism. This way, they observe the Brazilian power dynamics based on its institutional design, understood as constraints that shape social relations, encouraging or not certain political behaviors. Some institutional approaches, often derived from sociological neo-institutionalism, also discuss the manifestation of power underneath institutional rules. In Brazil, there is a particular legal and political arrangement that combines federalism, open list, proportional vote, multi-party system, etc., giving the president broad legislative powers, according to the current constitution, perpetuating the establishment of major coalitions for governability, as used to be the case at the time of the later constitution. In this time, the notion of coalitional presidentialism, this term was coined by Abranches, is a central point to Brazilian political science, and this is the main object of this presentation. There are two main trends originated from this approach. There is an optimistic view, which affirms that the Brazilian way of doing coalitions is highly functional, and I mean functional here in an ordinary sense. There's another one that holds that Brazilian coalitions are not that functional and based on personal interest and on pork barrel politics. I affirm that the optimistic current of Figueiredo and Limonge, followed to a greater or lesser degree by authors such as Pereira Melo, Renault, Santos, by approximating the Brazilian presidentialism to parliamentarism strategies and emphasizing the institutional powers of the president and the alliance of collegiate parties, is not yet capable of explaining the reason why the ordinary political game of Brazil can suddenly be blooded. For this reason, Limonge and these other authors are not able to explain the reason why major players of the national politics would not wait until the next elections instead of ousting President Rousseff. And I mean Dilma Rousseff, of course. This model is insufficient to explain moments of rupture. Carlos Pereira, that's another one. On the other side, believed that the anti-corruption sentiment was too strong at the time of the beginning of the Temer government, which has proved not to be true after the decision by the Brazilian Congress to not further pursue the two accusations by the Attorney General's office, which would have led to the removal of the head of the executive. How to deal with it? That's the first big question. Would Brazilian politics continue to follow the logic of pork barrel politics? I mean, the institutional design does not prevent clientelism, cronyism, and patrimonialism, galvanize of corrupt practices. The thing is that the available data do not show a shutdown of decisions or awakening of the executive after our constitution. The exchange of institutionalized support is even seen as a factor that provides stability, according to some authors, and a healthy function for the system in the case of Brazil, as argued by Figueiredo and Limonge. More recently, consider the time frame from our constitution. Some of its Authors also noted that the Congress officials that receive the most resources have a tendency to vote according with the executive. The thing is that these currents fail to understand that politics is a social system that has some organizations and that it suffers the differentiation pressures from several other systems, in particular from the economy, the strongest system of society. Analyses related to patrimonialism and clientelism, for example, have been the semantics used in the previous time to demonstrate some of these arguments. Well, in my work, I take the argumentation provided by Professor Stichler in order to discuss the theoretical terms in theoretical terms, its basic premises. But I don't have time For what reasons do Brazilian parties make coalitions? Is to formulate policies or to hide programs arising from outside politics, but from other social sectors? The second one, why do the Brazilian people demonstrate against some corruption cases on the one hand and not against others? For me, the problem is related to the fact that the Congress and its members do pay attention to the public repercussion of their acts at some degree. However, it seems that part of the electorate accept cases of corruption, as it happens last year. Well, it seems correct to affirm that coalitions of coalitional presidentialism that cannot be explained only in terms of their horse dealings, personalism, clientelism, and corruption. Then the arcane governance of state and or non-state sectors must be considered as part of the basic structures of the Brazilian constitutional dynamics in a process that fosters the exclusion of the people. Despite the enormous temporal differences and differences of analysis, the current situation evokes what was presented by Nunes Leal in the sense of being the means through which politics seems to be a paradox to the eyes of the Brazilian people. While private demands do not allow the shutdown of the political system and the differentiated creating exclusion, what is left to the population is to resort to politicians, as they are, to be minimally included in the state, in what today is translated by the budgetary amendments. It does not mean to say, however, that a political struggle for profound change cannot exist. Well, the problem is also related to the fact that Brasilia has a very weak public sphere. Neves here disagreed with Luhmann in that he regarded the public sphere as being relevant to the hetero-legitimation of the political system, making use of a Barbasian thinking to grasp such a notion. As stated by Neves, politics must have structures to process the information coming from this dimension and to absorb dissension without destroying this realm. For this reason, the public sphere is a place where political centers observe the communications of other actors in order to delimitate their range of action. Neves distinguished a weak public sphere from a strong public sphere, affirming that the latter is capable of significantly influences the legal and political realms, whereas the former is conceived as not being able to exert permanent or generalized impact on political and legal procedures. Consistent with this approach, there is a strong public sphere in most of the constitutional states, in which it has a relevant, continuous effect on practice concerning democratic measures and rule of law arrangements, thus conditioning both the law and political system. The worldwide public sphere, for instance, which just as fragmented as the worldwide regimes, is viewed as weak, since it's not capable of permanently and significantly influencing global political and legal procedures. Hence, this kind of public sphere does not promote the hetero-legitimation of specific systems in a satisfactory manner. The same rationality can be applied to the Brazilian situation. The public sphere in Brazil is not capable of exerting clout to ensure the proper function of political and legal procedures. Hence, this kind of public sphere does not foster and does not support, so to speak, the adequate legitimation of specific systems. To conclude, there is a technicalist and arcane governance that can help explain the global and national process arising as sabotage the Brazilian institutional design, with the fact of control of the population through arcane practices which not only compromise the representativeness of actors but also corrupt the rules of the game by hiding its dynamics and manage social problems from a technical approach. It's a main feature of Brazilian politics and legal system. So, without a strong public sphere, without a permanent and a significantly pressure coming from the people itself. So it's a very, I would say, not optimistic diagnosis, but as is how I see the situation and try to do this using Neves' terms. And I have to say that the public sphere, this discussion concerning public sphere and weak public sphere and a strong public sphere is also rationally made by Brookhaus here and Stichler also. And well, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maurício. Now I hand the word to our last panelist, Fábio Almeida.
As Isaac Newton once said, he could look farther because he climbed on the shoulders of giants. And here, there are huge giants of constitutional and sociological theory. One of them is Marcelo Neves, and it's such a great honor to be here in this event in his praise. I am especially honored to talk especially about this subject, since Marcelo is definitely a man that knows how to walk through the tiny line that divides consent and dissent. The fundamental premises of my speech are, first of all, dissent and consensus are necessary sociological elements for any constitutional democracy. Secondly, dissent is essential for the emergence of modern, functionally differentiated society. At the end of my speech, I will try to address the challenge I made to Maurício in order to analyze Brazil's current situation, because we are facing a huge crisis in our democratic legitimacy process. Maintaining a functionally differentiated structure is only possible because law, specifically constitutional law, protects the very possibility of functional differentiation by assigning fundamental rights. Rights structurally protect distinct social systems by granting legal autonomy to the mimetical replication of communication through the freedom of speech, scientific freedom, and civil and political liberties. These rights protect divergence between ideas, which help accelerate the very production and specialization of ideas through the publication of books, creating public forums of debate, and raising a dynamic civil society. Without dissent, those freedoms make no sense. There is no sense in talking about freedom of speech when nobody disagrees. We can't talk about political freedom and democracy when the elected officials are selected within a system which favors the election of the same candidates as a result of economic power, which suppresses the free debate and results on making hard to elect opposition candidates. There is a co-originality between the social structure which grants those rights and the very exercise of those fundamental freedoms. My departing point to make these bold claims are the Rawlsian and Habermasian hypothetical consensus theory and Luhmann's functional differentiation, based on the structural dissent founded on the autopoiesis and differentiation of social systems. As Professor Miguel told here, most of doctrinal positivistic constitutional theory still departs from a naive consent theory. Still today, when we have many sociological and philosophical theories which already bypassed those naive theories. We still are talking about social contract theories, not so sophisticated as Rawlsian ones, but still the ones developed by Locke, Hobbes, and Rousseau, which are based on a simplistic account of human rationality. And also, constitutional theory tries to found itself on a voluntaristic theory of constituent power, on which all power and all law is based on a power-based polity without any normative constraint. And I don't think that this is true at all. Constitutional sociology allowed us to build more complex theories, but maybe it has focused more on structural dissent than what is needed to support a relatively stable democracy. And here I'm referring to the problem Rawls addresses in his political liberalism, where he tries to understand how a democratic society can found itself in a state of affairs where people are basically disagreeing about every comprehensive doctrine. First of all, I address systems theory as a top-down theory, which aims to explain the operation of society based on a structural and functional differentiation. Systems theory looks at functional differentiation mostly by observing it from a top-down approach, from social systems to the micro-sociological aspects relating to systemic operations carried down as communications processes. This formal approach assumes psychological systems, but it is blind to how the operations within human minds really work. And the main focus is on the autopoiesis and differentiation of social systems. And as such, it actually helps us understand how dissent emerges and evolves, but from this macrostructural perspective. Rawls and Habermas, on the other hand, adopt what they call a bottom-up approach. Rawls observes this issue based on a strategic rationality approach, aiming for the normative premises on which democratic institutions could be based on. In his political liberalism, Rawls searched for an overlapping consensus based on constitutional essential elements, rights and fundamental principles, which are established above a society which is divided on different conceptions of the good. Habermas observes this issue as a result of communicative rationality, aiming to interpret constitutional theory based on an ideally assumed normative linguistic consensus. My proposal is that we should integrate both top-down and bottom-up approaches by integrating both theoretical observations. In my PhD, supervised by Professor Marcelo Neves and Paula Branches, which is a professor from the Institution of Philosophy here in Brasília, I developed a multi-level selection theory which integrates those observations in a three-level theory, which I borrow also from Jonathan Turner's sociological theory. In the microdynamic level, individual action results from individual psychology moved by innate dispositions and social individual learning. On the mesodynamic level, organizational actions take place, and it's constrained by social structures and also defines a space of action for individuals to act on. And at the microdynamic level, which is mostly studied by functional theory, there is functional differentiation and systemic action. In my view, there is a network of reciprocal implications going from the top structure, the macro structures of macrodynamic social reality to the microdynamic social reality, and vice versa. So there's a constant flow of information from one level of to the other, and these implications come from centripetal force, coming from moral and constitutional rationality, which gives individuals and organizations a normative orientation for their behavior. And also there are centrifugal forces which harm the stability of constitutional democracy, which is backed on one hand by the horizontal structural differentiation between social systems, and so the Constitution performs an integrating role in order to maintain social stability, and by the hierarchical and two-sided coupling between organizations, and this I borrow from this theory, and individual communications and social systems. Maybe we should fall back a little bit in sociological theory to Parsons and his idea that problems of double continuity should be at least partially discussed by admitting that individual action can be at least partially understood through the acceptance of a shared symbolic system. And maybe in constitutional democracies we should aim, and here I think I'm back in my discussion in Rawls' idea of public reason, maybe constitutional principles and rights could perform this role. So we are in a system in which there is a shared symbolic system which is needed for microsociological stability, and functional differentiation which is needed for the evolution and change of mesodynamic and macrodynamic structures. And as such, we have a social structure in which we have both dissent and consent as fundamental structures of our societies. The Constitution can normatively regulate the interaction between social systems more efficiently when it provides orientation for individual cyclic systems and provide a common language of rights, capable of stabilizing society not only functionally, but also in its microsociological interactions. The role of civil society and public sphere, as Maurício told us in this endeavor, is to structure and amplify constitutional rights as the medium through which public, political, and normative claims are made. This could be processed as a centripetal force in this kind of structure, and not a centrifugal one, if it is processed through the means of an abstract language in which every potential citizen could understand as his own, providing spaces of personal autonomy and communicative and systemic autonomy as well. We cannot assume nowadays that this kind of structure is organized in Brazilian civil society and civil structures. The excessive concentration of arguments and power within ideological bubbles has left minimal space of transversal communication. Since 2013, and I would say that even earlier, maybe in 2006 and 2007, we are seeing this process being slowly and gradually being built within our civil society, which is becoming normatively disoriented. Law is being interpreted as a demand coming from substantive consensus, which is not possible in a democracy. This consensus has been built by a right-wing conservative elite, which now has the power to impose its own conception of the good over institutions. And as such, it is reinforcing our tribal human psychology in order to define who is a friend and who is an enemy. And the left has been regarded as an enemy of the political institutions. We can see this phenomenon from a macrodynamic level, and we see deep systemic corruption and the colonization of law from politics, religion, and some kind of moralistic rationality. From the microdynamic level, there is a really shallow, and it is becoming even shallower, overlapping consensus. Our society is deeply divided within some ideological bubbles. And we can see this in some concrete case. For instance, criminal procedures are being handled differently when they are dealing with leftist politicians or right-wing politicians, and they tend to punish defendants more aligned to the left than to the right-wing accused ones. We have a really striking case here in 2013 during the middle of some protests that Brazilians were directing to the government, when Rafael Braga was arrested for some years because he was carrying on detergent. Yeah, his crime was this one. He was carrying in his hand a detergent. The police thought that the detergent would be used in order to clean his eyes if the police would address tear gas to his eyes, and he was arrested for this. Our political institutions are becoming deeply politically biased. We saw this in Dilma's impeachment, in which formal procedures were followed, but substantially it was a political coup. And Michel Temer, her vice president, became president, and now he was caught in much worse situations, and nothing has happened so from then on. Also, there's a different attitude from the police in right-wing and left-wing protests. So in left-wing, the police is much more harsh against the protesters than it is when the protests come from right-wing political movements. Also, in last 2 weeks, we saw that former President Lula was imprisoned in a procedure that was really fast. I'm not saying that criminal procedure shouldn't be tried fast, but it was much more faster than most political crimes are tried and settled. For instance, Azeredo, which was a senator some years ago, has faced 20 years of trial, while Lula's trial ended in almost 2 years. So, all in all, we are seeing that institutions are becoming more and more biased towards a conservative worldview, in a sense that I think that no social theorist would agree with the situation here. In order to conclude this my speech, I'd like to refer to a passage from the astronomer Carl Sagan in his book, The World Haunted by Demons. And he says, "Now, it's no good to have such rights if they are not used. A right of free speech when no one contradicts the government. Freedom of the press when no one is willing to ask the tough questions. A right of assembly when there are no protests. Universal suffrage when less than half the electorate votes. Separation of church and state when the wall of separation is not regularly repaired. Through this use, these rights can become no more than votive objects, patriotic lip service. Rights and freedoms, use them or lose them." Thank you.
Thank you, Fábio. Thank you all panelists for these very provoking and illuminating presentations. So now I'm going to reserve myself the right to make some comments and some questions or provocations to your exposition. So first to Miguel, Professor Miguel. So Miguel was highlighting how some of the ideas of Marcelo, they challenge traditional view and commonplaces of constitutional theory, highlight especially this view of the political system as a strong system, and he was describing the erosion of politics in Europe as a way to sustain this view. He was also saying how Marcelo challenges the idea of separation between state and society, state as a space of the political, society as a space of economy. And he highlighted the idea of transversal reason that Marcelo proposes, giving some examples of use of transversal reason in Europe. So my question to Professor Miguel, it's exactly about the transversal reason proposed by Marcelo. So the idea of transversal reason is the idea of conciliation. Is an idea of do not establish necessarily a previous hierarchy, of establishing a conciliation between two ideas, two fields of idea. My question is, what are the limits of this conciliation? What are the limits of this tolerance? Shouldn't we be intolerant in relation to certain fields of right and such defenses which are not tolerable anymore? For example, when you're breaking human rights, when you're breaking fundamental rights. So my question is basic that. What are the limits of tolerance, and then what are the limits of transversal reason? Because you gave some examples in Portugal. For example, when Portugal says that the right of the European Union is going to be prevalent, but this is not always the case, not only in Portugal but also in other states. So to Maurício, his presentation had very strong sentences, very strong declarations, talking about the weakness of the here and talk about the coalitional presidentialism. So I have two questions to Maurício. The first one is that while Professor Miguel was talking about an erosion of politics, your presentation was mostly about politics, about coalitional presidentialism. So how do you relate this vision of an erosion of politics with with the force that politics have in Brazil, and as you explained in your presentation? Also, I would like to know from you, what has been the role of the judicial branch and of international structures in the coalition of presidents? Because at a certain point you're affirming that what's left to people is to resort to politics. I tend to disagree with that. I think there is more to people, there is more to social movements than politics and than coalition. And the second question to Maurício is that you affirmed, this really struck me, that democracy without rule of law means dictatorship of majority. It's not the opposite. I mean, democracy with the rule of law is exactly the dictatorship of a minority that can control a majority. That without. So is it bad to have a dictatorship of majority in which sense? Because this is such a strong affirmation. And now, finally, to Fábio, very provoking, very interesting presentation, which Fábio was explaining some of the presuppositions of his idea of multi-level coevolution, very original idea. So I have two questions to you as well, Fábio, actually three. So the first one is that you start presenting, talking about this foundation of naive consent theories. In a way, how do you relate that with transversal reason? And this is a provocation. Is transversal reason also a naive consent theory? In a way that is a theory that proposes tolerance and conciliation. So is this also a naive consent theory? Or does transversal reason go beyond and opens a space for dissent? The second question, you talk about Brazilian society as normatively disoriented. And I don't see the figure as this chaotic and normatively disoriented scenario. I actually see that it's a very normatively oriented but selective, exclusive society. I don't see this chaos. I actually see a very orchestrated use of normative foundations and law. And third point, that's similar to the question that I did to Maurício. So if civil society and institutions civil society and public spheres are failing, what are the other mechanisms, institutional roads that we should use to reinforce dissent, to qualify dissent? You talk about ideological bubbles. If we have ideological bubbles, we do have dissent. So what's the problem of dissent that exists in Brazil? It's not about the non-existence of dissent. Maybe it's more about how this dissent works, what are the institutional means, what are the other mechanisms that we can use to promote better this dissent. So these are my questions. Maybe let's start with responding to these questions, and then after that I can open to the public.
Well, Carina, thank you very much for your thoughtful questions. I think the basic question you put to me is the question of the defense of the democratic state. What are the limits of this concept of the transversal reason? What are the limits of the constitutional tolerance we can envisage? Well, I think we must always defend the two foundations of constitutional rule. On the one hand, fundamental rights, on the other hand, democratic basis of power. But I think the real problem is how to deal with states of exception in constitutional rule. That is, for me, the real question. Are exceptional cases, emergency cases, to be ruled by law, or should they be outside the law and deal with other first alternative is the only available to constitutional lawyers. And so I would say the limits are always the limits of constitutional rule. You, of course, cannot tolerate violations of fundamental rights. You have this problem here in Brazil, specific with the relationship between the national state and the indigenous communities. I think it's a very different problem. It's not a common problem in constitutional law. And I think, of course, native people, many times they don't know they have rights, but that's something I think it's changing, and it's changing precisely perhaps because transversal reason. They also have access to transversal reason, and it would be very difficult for them to have access to public reason or whatever loaded conception of reason. So that would be my answer.
Well, I would say that I have three great questions here. So first of all, I would say that we are seeing in Brazil the erosion of democratic politics and out of politics. I think that we can talk about politics also in non-democratic alliances. So it means for me that our whole constitutional design is being eroded, and I'm not sure if we can talk about constitution in non-democratic arena. So for me, it's politics. The thing now is about politics, and the two greatest problems that law is not able at this moment, it's not capable of limit politics now. So the constitutional institutions are not functioning. So as institutions não estão funcionando. On the contrary, that is every day affirmed in the newspapers. The second one, well, democracy without rule of law as the
majority
dictatorship of majority. Well, I would say that politics without law, when you have politics without law, you can do, so to speak, everything you want to. So if you don't treat all the citizens in an equal way, so politics can destroy the minority of the people. And this is a dialogue with the text of Mr. Thornhill's here. So I do believe that without rule of law, politics can destroy minorities. And what is, for me, the crucial point in the rule of law approach is that to treat equally all the citizens, all the people in a country. And last of them, the influence of international structures, international law, international politics. Yeah, as I see the world, it's based, you have lots of different social systems, but not just systems, but also international and global networks, and lots of arrangements that do influence or do exert influence over the state constitutions and the state politics and state law. I would say only that it's a co-evolutionary process which involves very complex arrangement in the state law, the state politics, and in the international alliances. Well, what else? I think that's that. I have a provocation to the both of them and to Marcelo Neves too. I still don't understand why we keep talking about reason. It's kind kind of strange for me, you know. Why do we still talk about raison d'être? Razão transversal. Rationality.
No, rationality.
So what?
I thought reason.
No, okay. So why do we speak about reason here and not about rationality? Yeah, that's true. Marcelo do speaks about rationality in transconstructionism and not about public reason or using the concept from various of reason. So I would like to hear you about it. I don't know if I'm breaking.
So maybe Fábio respond the questions after that. We can have the reflection of both of you about why we keep talking about this.
The issues posed by Carina and Maurício posed me in a difficult place here, but let's try to do the best I can. Well, about featuring transversal reason as a naive consent theory, I wouldn't say that. Maybe transversal rationality is even more sociologically and theoretically sound than the proposal I still aims to hold at. But I still believe that the main problem, which is, I try to go deeper in this argument better in the article that Professor Miguel referred to, is that there may be some conditions where we must hold to fundamental rights and human rights, even if we can't assume that we can talk to the community or to the individuals we are addressing to. Sometimes institutions must decide. And if we allow institutions to just go back and do not apply fundamental rights or in order to preserve the autonomy of sometimes of individuals against their own communities, I think that we don't have law at all. Law sometimes is power, of course. I mean the legitimate law is justified power, but I give to that transversal rationality might give even the state of the legal state, oh my God, I forgot the expression now. The rule of law. Come on, how can a lawyer forget the rule of law? But sometimes transversal rationality can give us some reason to not apply the legal rule as we should according to the law. For instance, the case of the Suruahá, and I gave it to Marcelo's criticism of my criticism to him. So we are talking about this. Maybe we shouldn't just apply the criminal code to the community, but we should try to find a way to preserve both the community and try to preserve the child as well. So maybe not through the criminal law, but through other kinds of institutional instruments, tools, in order to do that. Maybe I still maintain my viewpoint that we should aim to preserve fundamental rights, but maybe transversal theory can be incorporated by institutions in order to find another ways to treat the case. So the second provocative question is Brazil normative disoriented at all, or is it being selected, exclusive, and not disoriented, but precisely oriented to exclude? Well, I can give to that, but I wouldn't say that that is a normative orientation according to constitutional standards. Okay, you can say that this is what people do and that this elite think it's right, but it can be at most a conception of the good or of the bad, the sense. But I wouldn't say that it's a normative conception because it can't be universalized, it can't be applied across different segments of Brazilian society. It only benefits one kind of one segment and it excludes everyone else. So I don't think it's normative. The third question was questions about civil society and public spheres. If there are bubbles, there are dissent. It's our premise. And then you ask me, what are the institutional means to promote better dissent? I think that we must talk seriously about not forbidding or prohibiting free speech, but regulating it. I think that people should be free to say their ideas and to talk about what they want, but I see no reason why shouldn't we regulate, for instance, Facebook. I mean, a company that invests a lot in an ad, on advertisement, gets much more, gets a much wider audience than Maurício or I or Marcelo Neves or Professor Branco's can. So why shouldn't we regulate that? I mean, people should be free, but they should be also free. And here I invoke the thought of Cass Sunstein in a book he wrote in 2000, I think, about how the internet would erode public speech and the public sphere. And I think he was right, because people tend to aggregate in ideological bubbles and to talk with people who agree with them. And I think that a huge point of public sphere is to talk, to make people to talk with those people that disagree with him. This is the point that John Stuart Mill made in the 90s. We should have a free market of ideas, precisely because people would evaluate the best ideas and confront data. Of course, I'm not so optimistic about people being able of doing that. I think that our mind is full of biases and inclinations, but I think that we should do a better job, and when I say we, I'm talking about institutions, to regulate how the information flows in the internet, and how could we make the internet a good place for free speech and public sphere. Those would be my thanks.
Well, answering quickly to your provocation, I think in a way you are right. Reason is a concept more akin to the idea of public reason, and I think Marcelo has more in mind the idea of a bridge between rationalities that are already there. I agree with you. I excuse myself from not being trained in systems theory and Marcelo's framework, but I think I understood what you meant, and I agree with that. And furthermore, I think it's a useful way of criticizing public reason, the idea of public reason and the paradox and difficulties that this concept can promote. Thank you.
So I think I will be the only one to hold the concept of reason still. Well, I think that since my observation was made based on the three-level theory, I think that especially when we think about the micro-sociological level and the meso-sociological level, backing the claims of individuals, even if they are more akin to a particular set of beliefs or of rationalities, setting a common language in order to, according to which people could talk and make their claims, even if to preserve their own autonomy and their own rationality. And in this point, I disagree with David Cioli, because I think that his preservation of collegial formations sometimes can lead to to coalitions that only preserve their private interests and not the public interest at all. And we can see here in Brazil many agglomerations of public officers which only want to engage in political discussions in order to earn a better wage. Come on. This is not the point of public institutions. So I still hold to the point that at least at the micro-sociological and meso-sociological level, we might hold ourselves to a tiny, shallow concept of reason that might be the idea of John Rawls' public reason, which is really tiny, according to which we can hold to fundamental rights, fundamental constitutional principles, and so on. Of course, the way a native Brazilian would address an issue of fundamental right would be quite different from a businessman, a university student, or professors, and so on. their backgrounds is different, but they will try to find a way to talk between themselves according to the language of rights. They still hold to that.
So now I open to questions. Do we have any? Oh, okay.
Was asked by him.
Sim.
Yes. That's the question of transversal rationality is not something embracing as with Wolfgang Welch. I take first this contact with Welch, but I speak from transversal rationality between different language game or system. And in this case of Suruaha, that is very irritating for Carina, that's, I think has not to do with Western tradition, liberal tradition, and communitarianism. It's not the question in my case. I think that has to do with a conception, Christian conception of life as biological conception. For example, in the idea against abortion, and the notion of life as other notion of life of the Yanomami. For Yanomami, life has to do with culture. If the mother left the children, the baby there is no life. He came back, but there is something that is heteronomous. If the child is, the baby is handicapped or twin, we have to decide twin because they serve some beliefs. And they are isolated groups. It's not as in Portugal that they are isolated. We came there and they are isolated. If you try to bring our constitutional right and criminal law, constitutional law and criminal law to these people, we will take all adults of this community and bring to a jail, to a Carandiru. And then we will perpetrate a genocide. A genocide to eliminate the Yanomami. And that is a paradox. I am not to kill children, that's clear. But the solution of the legislative power with a member of Congress was to criminalize very strongly also the anthropologists. The anthropologists that went there, go there, could be criminalized. Also, Levi-Strauss that saw it and wrote about it in the community, Levi-Strauss has to be in jail when he came today. What I criticize is this idea that has not to do with liberalism. There's a Christian, there's evangelical community that promote this bill, this draft. And I was against this draft. If you read the draft, it's to distract all this community with the idea of a Christian way of life, an idea of good. And a member of Congress of Rio de Janeiro changed it and said you have to have some option to these children. And today they changed a lot. The Suruaha, they changed it. They accept adoption. They don't want sometimes that the child stay in the community, but they accept the adoption. And that is the problem. And transversal rationality has not to do with consent in the sense of with tolerance, this concept of Western tradition. Transversal has with another tradition that is what the Feyerabend say. There is conflict in transversal rationality and there is also dialogue. But dialogue is not discourse theory of happiness or consent-orientated. Dialogue is inviable that you are able, in the contact with the other schools or the other in general, to see that the most profound, deep conviction are mere chimera. You are able to change. That is not a consent. To be able to change, we have to say that my word, my idea have limits. But I think when we speak about rights in this Western tradition, we have not to do a lot with rights. Had a lot to do with Christian conception of life.
Thank you, Marcelo. Now we open to questions. Do we have any questions? Professor Mohammed.
Congratulations to the old panelists on their great job. I think it's fantastic to hear from all of you. Even I don't have that much Portuguese for the first panel, but I'm sure that it's fantastic as well. But my concern is going to be to Fábio and Maurício, because they have been touched base on the rule of law and democracy in Brazil, and I tried to compare how is that also in the Arab world and Middle Eastern regimes at the current moment. Specifically, I'm from Egypt, even I teach this kind of courses right now in the United States, and two things. I really like it when Fábio touched base about the criminal proceedings and how fast the criminal proceedings here in the regimes, and we can see this within Egypt at the current moment under the Sisi regime. And how do you see how that for example, the Mubarak trial, when he get out right now, and we didn't see any kind of transparent trial or criminal trial. Also, after the exile of the Islamist president, also we can see how fast, how the trial had been so fast with him without any kind of evidentiary rules or such a thing. So I wonder if the judiciary here in Brazil would be used as a legitimate tool by a dictatorial regime, taking into account that in Egypt right now the regime is a pure military regime. And of course, one of the main things that's always upsetting us in the Arab world, that when we see that the United States or the European Union countries, they're always calling for democracy and human rights, and they're always describing the Arab world that there is no democracy in there, but one of the main things that they are supporting this kind of dictatorship regimes for long times. The United States have been supporting Mubarak for 30 years, Gaddafi for 40 years in Libya, Ben Ali in Tunisia, and all that. So and of course, justifying the arguments that they are bad terrorism and all that things, specifically in Egypt, like within northern Sinai, that they are fighting ISIS or whatever. But the thing is, I'm wondering if in Brazilian system here, if the regime or the current government is using the judiciary as a tool to legitimize or to justify the kind of oppression, as I said, taking into account that the oppression in Brazil is a little bit different than in Egypt, because you guys get rid of the military, but in Egypt right now we reinstalled again the military rule. On the other hand, I like it when Maurício have been talking about the public sphere and the civil society. How do you see the civil societies here? Because recently in Egypt there is a law have been issued or enacted about the NGOs and civil society, and I had a piece just came out recently about the NGO laws in Egypt, and now you can see that around more than 400 NGOs in Egypt have been shut down under a Sisi government. And you can see that there is no kind of freedom of expression or freedom of thoughts to the people, and you can see that the journalists or the reporters, they have been going to jail if they are reporting. Recently, when we have this sham election of Sisi, and some of the Western leaders have been congratulating the president, including President Trump in the United States, when he had been concluding him and his advisors didn't say that you do not have to congratulate Sisi or to congratulate Putin after this sham election that they have as a dictatorial regime, but of course because of the national security interests of the United States in the region and all that. So I'm wondering how you see if the civil society and the protection of human rights here in Brazil is system, also within the current regime here in Brazil, specifically you guys are close to getting an election soon in October, so I think it's going to be kind of interesting. Hopefully, I don't know what you guys always say. Hopefully, I hear that a lot here since I have been here for just last week. So everybody said, "Oh, hopefully." So I think that would be kind of interesting to hear about the role of civil society. And on the same point, I like what Carina mentioned about the security law and cyber law, because 2 weeks ago, the Congress or the Parliament in Egypt, if you've been following up, we just have a kind of an agreement on a cyber law or security law, cyberspace law in Egypt, and also you can see a big suppression on the using of the internet in Egypt and the blocking of the websites and all that, even if you wanted to post on Facebook and all this kind of stuff. And you can look at the punishments or the hilarious punishments in that law, and you can see that there is no kind of proportionality test within the crimes and punishment. Even in some provisions of the law, they said that the complete crime should be punished within the attempted crime. So I'd love to hear about that. How do you see, if you guys here have a security law or a cyber law, I'd love to hear about that. But in general, that was fascinating panels. I'd like. Thanks.
I will begin with that. Well, if I understood well the question, it was how if the judicial system could be used as a tool to a dictatorial regime here in Brazil. I think that the main, I might sound a little naive here, but from someone who works inside the judicial system, I'm a clerk at the Superior Court of Labor Law, I don't think that judges are badly intentioned, most of them, but I think that they are used to concern themselves with governability. They, for instance, the case of Dilma, I think that one of the main concerns was, especially in that case of the Superior Court of electoral law, of election law, well, in which they, using the same argument, the court could allow for the impeachment for the continuity of the trial, and then when Dilma was taken out of office during the impeachment process, the same argument was referred to by one of the justices, Dilma Mendes, to preserve Temer's mandate. So the same argument, and of course in that case I won't be able to examine it from a moral standpoint, but I won't do that. And then the Supreme Court got the opportunity to uphold an eventual impeachment process of Temer, and they just keep invoking some formalities in order to avoid that, and the Congress as well. So what I think that it's happening from most judges, I won't say that some of them are badly intentional, we don't know what happens inside these negotiations, but I think that many of them are willing to save Temer government, for instance, because they say, okay, we already lost a president, are we going to lose another one? I think that's a major issue. And through this kind of reasoning, which I think is not adequate for a judicial court to refer to, I think that potential dictatorship could appropriate itself with the judicial system in order to do that. I mean, in our last dictatorship, for at least the ostensive dictatorship we had in the 60s, between the 60s and the 80s, the judicial system did almost nothing against in order to preserve the rule of law and against the government. I'm quite sure that the same would happen if we had a coup d'etat, a formal coup d'etat. So that would be my answer.
I don't think the judge will stand against
about the coup d'etat.
First of all, I would not focus on moral or on car-wash application. I would say that we have to see the whole picture. But I would say that briefly, at the end, that I see that the law system in Brazil is legitimating non-democratic politics, non-democratic political actions coming from basically from our president, our presidential office. Well, now, my dear Mohammed, let's talk about Middle East. Let's think of the oust of Muammar al-Gaddafi, about the oust of Mubarak, about the oust of even of Saddam Hussein. What we see is the human rights law and the international law being imposed to these countries and to Brazil also by very strong political, international political organizations such as the UN Security Council, the United States, and Europe in general itself. I have a lot of things to say about this, but I would say that it's a great twist to the absurd to observe international global human rights and international law in general as, so to speak, a good thing for the world. I think that global human rights, international law has their dark sides, and the reality of the Middle East shows us how selectivity can be applied in so-called democratic realms or so-called heroes of international law. I have a question for you about NGOs in Egypt. How is the situation with international NGOs, for example, with Oxfam and other important, were they also shut down?
Yeah, mostly yes. Most of the NGOs laws right now. I mean,
Human Rights Watch.
Yeah, I mean, Human Rights Watch is blocked in Egypt.
Blocked.
Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, all this. And of course, if you look at the regime is saying, we are just trying to save the country from terrorism, which I do not understand how Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch deal with terrorism. Not only in Egypt. Before I came here, I was in Dubai, and I cannot even watch Al Jazeera as well. So you can see that the whole dictatorial regimes, and even the dictatorship, even worse in the Gulf area. You will find it out in Bahrain, Qatar, and now you can see with this kind of the strategy that Egypt, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, that they have been cutting diplomatic relations with Qatar because they said, Qatar is supporting terrorism and they are supporting extreme Islamists in the region. But if you ask them, where is your evidence about this? They were not going to give you any kind of evidence or whatever thing. So they're just always saying that we are just protecting our people. And when you ask them, okay, so what about the human rights of these people in these countries? So that's another question. And now, recently, I think there was a kind of a journalist, and she's a human rights activist in UK, and she was broadcasting the sham election in Egypt. And if you heard about her, she just got deported from the country, and she spent 7 years. And when she had been broadcasting this election 2 weeks ago, she had been referred to a military trial, and they told her, even if you're going to face a military trial, or you will be deported to United Kingdom. So, and she got on the aircraft and just got in. So you can see, and I don't understand when also all of the money that sometimes that the United States or even the European Union countries spend to support democracy or the human rights issues in this region or in that part of the world, where it's going. I mean, and they said, we didn't see any kind of human rights. Okay, but because you are supporting this. Why you are supporting this? if you are not touched based on the roots of the problem, and you do not have just to deal with the symptoms, because you have to ask yourself why this dictatorship coming from.
Of course, we have a lot to talk later, but I would say just, you know that Keck and Seeking developed, you better than me, that they developed this concept of transnational advocacy networks. I would say that this situation in the Middle East nowadays, and also in Brazil, poses a very difficult question to this kind of theory, but to this kind of approach. I say that if we are seeing the shutdown of very important NGOs and also local NGOs, maybe we cannot talk anymore about transnational advocacy networks, or it is relating serious problems to this kind of approach.
We still have time for one or two questions, so Professor Chris.
Thank you very much, Dee. Thank you very much for the presentations and the discussion. It's illuminating. For many of us, obviously, it's an opportunity to talk about Brazil and to learn about Brazil as well. So I wonder if we could focus the remainder of the discussion specifically on Brazil, because not all of us are entirely informed about the situation. So my question reflects this kind of position, because I follow developments in Brazil closely, but obviously cannot claim expertise. So my question may seem provocative. It's not meant to seem provocative. It's really more a request for information, or perhaps some kind of clarification of the orientation of the debate and so on. The call for democratic politics, or for a reinforcement of democratic politics in Brazil, is obviously a position from which nobody would dissent. My question is about what this actually means. In the actual frame, as far as I understand the situation, the framework for competitive democratic politics has not disappeared. The presidential elections are coming. I can see that there's a certain move towards a kind of dominant party system taking place at the moment, in which the incumbent government will utilise state resources to control the rules of electoral competition and access to the mechanisms required for electoral competition. This is clear, but the essential formal framework for competitive democratic politics has not disappeared. It's still there, and I wonder then whether the question is also about there is a question about Democrats in Brazil. In it's perfectly possible to vote for the Workers' Party without Lula. It's perfectly possible to mobilise democratic opposition. In fact, to mobilise a large majoritarian democratic opposition without one person. So there must be a question about the democracy of democracy in a way, in that why is democratic opposition so strongly personalised around one person, whose removal from the political focus, although of course extraordinarily lamentable, nothing that I'm saying implies any condoning of this, but there must be a possibility to overcome the extraordinary personalisation of political opposition around one figure. I mean, personalism is a factor in every political system, but it is of itself a pathology of democracy, which democracy has to overcome, I would say.
Well, Professor Thornhill, I've had some discussions about this issue with Marcelo Neves during the formal procedure of Dilma's impeachment. And my own position was okay, we are following the legal procedures. But the whole point is that a deeper issue. I think that democracy is not only an issue of following the formal procedures, but also some substance which derives from a certain principle of equality. I mean, we follow all the formal procedures, but in worse situations than Dilma faced, for instance, we haven't seen the institutions going and working on in order to do the same to Michel Temer. And even the judicial system, you see that the criteria which the judicial system used to one side of the politics is not the same criteria as it used to the other side. And as such, the institutions have been working in a way that it formally works according to the rule of law, okay, they're following the formal letter of the law. But on the other hand, when you see a wider picture of what's happening, you see that most of the important leaders of the left side, of the left wing, are being persecuted. Okay, they might have been, I'm not naive to say that they didn't have involved themselves with corruption or things like that. Of course, I don't know how I haven't read the criminal procedure in order to say anything about that. But there are really famous cases that we can say, come on, these left-wing, these politicians are being persecuted, and these are not, these right-wing are not. Come on, there was that issue of a helicopter that was caught with hundreds of kilograms of cocaine, 500 kilograms of cocaine, and even the helicopter has been released. So no one was persecuted.
That's a member of the representative house.
And was one of the members of our representatives house, a powerful family in Minas Gerais.
And the property now, o proprietário do helicóptero foi agora indicado para cargo político também.
Yeah, exactly. And so you see how institutions are working against. Of course, you say, Professor Tony, can I vote to the Workers' Party? Can I vote for another party? Yeah, but what happens when the institutions are selecting which candidates remain?
This point was more whether democracy has failed. He has a point. The fact is, that it's still possible to run for elections without Lula, for the left, or for the Democrats. I think, democracy, we are in a crisis of democracy, it's clear, but there are still, the basic mechanisms of competitive democracy are somehow still there. Although maybe the point would be, we don't know yet if they are there.
Yeah, we don't know that. That's why when people ask, okay, are we going to have elections? We say, don't know, come on. Last week, right before the Supreme Court decided the habeas corpus to Lula, a general came to the press and said, okay, if you don't decide the right way, we will intervene. Come on. This is not democracy working. I give to that.
No, I want to disagree with a point of view. I agree with you with the egalitarian rule. That's very different. But I think at least for the partial rules in Brazil, because in the law of the judge in Brazil, one cannot speak before the judgment. A judge will not be suspension. And more was in a move. He was received honor in this field, in this move. The move was to say that Lula is guilty. He could not be. That's a void process. A void. Then it's not on rule of law. It's also, I think, rule of law was not followed in this case.
I support with just a small distinction between
okay, I can try to follow the rule of law and substantially break it.
But Chris' point is not that one.
Yeah.
Yes, no, I think I want on to think about the president.
Yeah, but I think we can fix democracy, but and I think it was a mistake from our left to personalize its politics. It was a huge mistake, and now we are seeing some of these effects.
Well, the very honest answer is that I don't know. Mr. Thornhill, I think that we cannot talk about an ideal type of democracy. I do agree with you when you say that we can find democratic elements in constitutional constellations or different states. And I do think that we still have democratic elements in Brazil. You know, the lawyers can sue cases, and we can do things. We can get together to protest against tenure. I don't know. By we, I mean the rich white people. I don't know if all the people can do it. For example, as we've seen yesterday in the case of this so-called flat of Lula. Yes, we are seeing or experiencing a huge crisis, and it is still to be seen if we're going to have elections, if democracy will work. What I can say is that sociologically we are seeing that democracy and rule of law in Brazil is not or are not capable nowadays to respond, to block the interference, the flow, the communicative flows coming from very strong political and economic sides, not only from Brazil but also from the international realm.
I would like to question you both on this. Is it possible to say that the judiciary in Brazil is dominated by right-wing people, or there is another explanation for this unequalitarian treatment of politicians?
I wouldn't say right-wing, but I would say moralistic-minded judges. I don't know whether you agree, but they try to see the law not as an issue, as norms that should apply with an egalitarian approach and everything. So they say, okay, the press is saying that the left is corrupt and everything. And I think they try to incorporate their own conception of the good and move the institutions on according to that conception of the good. I mean, one of the prosecutors in the case of Lula said that he wouldn't eat until Lula didn't get the habeas corpus. Come on, it's the prosecutor. You can't do that. So I think it's more moralistic than, okay, I'm a liberal, far-right, conservative. Of course, I think that many judges are conservative, but that's not my point. I think that their approach to the issues is more moral than legal sometimes.
I would like to add some questions to the question of Professor Chris. I think, quoting you, democracy is a process. And in Brazil, it has been a cyclical and very challenging process because we are always up and down. So we think that we are having a democratic process, and suddenly we are taken by a process and by events that we thought that we would never have to face again. So I think democracy is a process, but you did identify something that's challenging to Brazilian democracy, and even more challenged than the idea of having a coup d'etat or impeachment or a very instrumental use of norms, which is the personalism. We should not be here just discussing the judgment of one president or if someone is being followed or not. We should be discussing here what's the legacy that we had during this left-wing government, what are the ideas that remain, and who can bring these ideas, who can advance these ideas. So I think this is a great challenge that we identified. What we are facing here is not a problem of one person being prosecuted, but the ideas of this person. And this is the big problem. We're focusing on just one leader, which was a great leader which advanced an important agenda of the left. But one of the main contributions of this person was actually to give space to people that didn't have voice, to include people that didn't have voice in Brazil, like how it was being discussed here yesterday. So black people, LGBTI people, women, and then who are these people now to advance the project brought by one that has been persecuted? And just one more thing. So in the end of the presentation of Fábio, because this is kind of related with what we're discussing here, you quoted, you made a quote, and in this quote you affirmed that it's no good to have such rights if they are not used. And I really have to, I highly dispute that. I know that now in Brazil we are having instrumental use of norms, being that because we have left-wing oriented judges or right-wings, but the existence of these rights and of this normative framework and the advance that we did in democracy some years ago, they are not going to come back to ground zero. We did something, these rights are there, people know about these rights, and this is not going to fade away.
Just to respond to Mr. Brito, I'd say that we have right-wing people in very crucial positions in our judicial system, but the thing is, as Carina was saying, we cannot talk about the people. It's a very, very big structure, and we are seeing in everyday decisions also really very big episodes concerning the application of the rule of law. And I would say that Lula, to Mr. Thornhill, concerning personalities, I would say that we are talking about the Brazilian politics now. So Lula is not a revolutionary. He never wanted to do a revolution. And yes, his figure is still very important to the left and to the Brazilian politics. It's also a challenge to the left wing people in Brazil to overcome this personalistic side of our politics. But Lula, as he said, is an idea too. So when you are putting Lula in jail without a proper judgment or a judgment based on the rule of law, you are also sending a message to all the left that you have to you cannot do some things that is very common in the Brazilian politics, but the right-wing people can do things that they are much worse.
A very short point. I agree with what you said and what Carina, as Carina explained, but I think that this story is a little longer and more complicated than that, because in fact there were other options in the Workers' Party during Lula's government, and they have been catched, all of them have been catched. They were involved probably in corruption, but there is a classic case in São Paulo coming from the government of the PSDB, where Swiss companies have confessed corruption in the construction of the building of the subway in São Paulo. The Swiss prosecutors sent the evidence for Brazil, and they just lost the files. They lost the files. They found the files 5 years later, and they said, there was a mistake. We just put the files in the wrong place, and now we found, and then everything was already prescribed. So, these were the biggest leaderships, the most important leaderships from the other party. While in the Workers' Party, all the important leaders besides Lula have been caught. So in the end, what happened really was actually that Lula was the only one who remained. And yeah, of course, but on the other hand, think of the Republican Party today without Trump. They go on. Yes, but they go on, but they will not win the elections. They would have not won the election, probably. Or the Roosevelt in 37. I agree with you. The point is, I agree with you. But the point is, yes, in democracy, in working functional democracies, personalities are also important, and it depends on how it interplays. But I agree with you with the point. I mean, we can't say yet that we are not a democracy anymore. And I would even say that now we don't know if the Workers' Party. It can be the case that the Workers' Party wins the election without Lula. It can be. I mean, it's highly possible. It's not this possibility is not so remote. So, but you have a good point there.
Okay, so thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Professor. Good learning you. Thank you, Marcelo. It's 11:47. Do we have any comment? We still have 5 or 10 minutes. If anyone wants to make some comments, someone here in the panel, final comments? No. Okay, so I would like to thank everyone that's here. One more time, I would like to thank the organizer of this event, Maurício Palma, Douglas Aiden, but also Natalie, who could not be present here. And we are going to have a break now, and we are going to come back to the second panel of the day at 2:30. Então a gente volta às 2h30 para o nosso próximo painel de hoje. Obrigada.